Good morning. Welcome to Quality Time with Koala Bear, episode number 1. Today's June 17th, 2020. And the main part of these videos is to talk about my opinions on the state of the union today. These are tough stuff topics. So this is not easy. It's not easy for any of us. So before we begin episode 1, I want to clarify, do some quick housekeeping. When I talked about isms and its, I said we're not really going to get into a whole lot of that, and all people have value, immense value, and important. Okay, so I need to clarify about some of this stuff. We are going to get into some of the isms and ist and so forth. What I'm referring to is that the endless argument and back and forth, if it doesn't advance the conversation, if we're not moving forward, then it's really not helpful. So I'm trying to present my opinions based upon informed decisions and things that I've learned in my life and use it in the context of history. So I just need to clarify that in case it was a little confusing. I'm going to lay out how our personal choices and personal responsibility really matters. With that being said, episode 1 is to martyr or not to martyr. And we're going to use some cases and kind of analyze some of this stuff. Calling racism and racist seems to be the thing that a lot of people are doing in the woke crowd, the woke mob mentality. And all that really does is it creates word traps. And then there's this endless cycle that no matter what you say or what you do, you're going to be labeled something. And that's just, that's not helpful. It doesn't advance anything. And that this crowd will find you guilty of being whatever that crowd demands. And then they pressure other people and companies to be afraid and legalistic, and then shaming you. And next thing you know, you're on this big hamster wheel that really doesn't advance anything in life. It's so dang out of control. So we're going to get into this. To martyr or not to martyr. Black Lives Matter people, as a group of people, this is an aggressive political movement. So when people say Black Lives Matter, if you just listen to the words itself, well, of course, Black Lives Matter. And if that is the intent to say that Black Lives Matter, okay, Black Lives Matter too. Okay, I think this is important. Okay, because we need to establish that what Black Lives Matter really is an aggressive mob mentality political movement to burn everything down. They're not interested in solutions. They're interested in actually harming more people. So if you're going to say Black Lives Matter, then it needs some clarification, all right? Because what I believe is that all lives matter. And a lot of people believe the same thing. I think the majority of people, I think 80% of people, 90% of people believe that all lives matter. It just so happens that this bullying tactic, this mob mentality, this woke crowd, if you will, has turned so incredibly nasty, and they're bullying the hell out of people, and it's not right. And people need to speak up about it, and I am. All lives matter. That makes black activists angry. Well, they were already angry, and probably because they weren't loved as children or something like that. There are problems in this world, but there's a lot of these people that are they're ginning stuff up of hatred and division. To say that Black Lives Matter, well, that's nice, but all lives matter, okay? And what's happened is that the people who are pushing this movement, they're taking the bottom feeders in society. And when you're talking about Black Lives Matter, they're taking the bottom feeders, the criminals who are black, and they're raising them up to martyrhood, to martyrdom. That's insanity. And I'm going to use some cases here of what I think would be a good martyr versus a bad martyr. They're twisting. They're twisting their own race. This is what they're saying. They say, well, the black race and everything else. Well, okay. Well, you're twisting that to gin up even more hatred and division than ever before. And the liberal media just feeds right into that. Because this is how they gain power. This is how they hold on to power, by manipulating and using people. And they can get higher ratings and they can get more clicks, and that generates more money for them. This has gone on for a long period of time. The Al Sharptons and the Jesse Jacksons of the world, they use this. They do. They have latched on to certain key phrases, and they're saying, aha, that's going to generate more hatred and more division, and we're going to have more control, and we're going to be able to get more money for different things. This is a long, they're playing the long game. And right now they're winning. Right now they're winning. Antifa and modern Marxist revolutionaries, there's a lot of people, campuses, they're butting all of this. They're lumping everything together because all they want to do is just burn it down. They don't want to solve problems. They just want to burn it down. And that's just ridiculous. And we as people need to stop putting up with that. Okay? Don't put up with that. You need to speak up. This is reminiscence of the Black Panther Party movement of the 1970s, except this is amplified 1,000 times. The Black Panther Party was really anti Vietnam War and civil rights protests, but then it turned ugly. It turned ugly. So they weren't really interested in solving issues. They were just angry against the white man. And they took it out even on certain black people in the 1970s. So let's get into two of the main characters in this. I'm going to draw some parallels. George Floyd. George Floyd, I've said this over and over again, did not deserve to be murdered. He did not deserve to be murdered by a cop. He did not deserve to be murdered by a white police officer putting the knee on his neck. I've said this over and over and over again. So let's just make this very clear. Almost everybody out there, I can't imagine somebody would disagree with this, that the putting the neck on George Floyd was horrendously graphic and horrible to watch if you've seen it on video. I did. Seen it a couple of times. It's just, it shouldn't have happened. It's just blatant disregard for another person's life. He was already in custody. Okay, so I made that clear many, many times. I want to get that out there again. I also want to say that the painting and the murals of George Floyd and making this guy out to be a martyr is the wrong thing to do. This is Black Lives Matter political movement. This is people who have all of this energy and rage, and they're putting that upon George Floyd to say, oh, he needs to be martyred. I don't think so. I think somebody who's got a long criminal history like him should not be martyred. I really, I don't. I don't think anybody. I don't care what white person. I don't care if it's a Hispanic person or something like this. If you're a criminal, if you're got a long history of being a criminal, no, that ain't right. One of the things that George Floyd went to prison for a period of time was a breaking and entering into a woman's home with a bunch of other dudes that were there. They broke in, they assaulted her. George Floyd even admitted that he took a loaded pistol that he had, stuck it in the pregnant woman's belly as they were robbing her place, and then as they left, some of the accomplices, or one of the accomplices with him, pistol whipped the woman. Now, this is the worst of society doing stuff like this, and you want to martyr this guy? Now, again, George Floyd being murdered by the police officer was wrong, and that needs to be adjudicated through the criminal justice system. And yes, there needs to be some police reform. But to automatically martyr this guy did horrific things in his past. And yeah, history matters. His past matters. It's not like you made an oops one day and then you got your life back together. No, this is a repeated offense. Let's look at Rodney King, 1991. A police chase over 100 miles an hour on freeway and residential streets. The police were trying to pull him over because he was driving erratically. Later, come to find out that he had been driving drunk. He was drunk driving. King later admitted that the reason that he was trying to evade police was because he was on parole for robbery. So is this the best of society back then? No, it wasn't. He had a long rap sheet also, a long criminal history. What happened to him was that they tried to get him out of the car. They tried to arrest him several times. He kept resisting arrest, and then they proceeded to beat him. Now, I will say that what the cops did to beat on him, to this day, I still think that was wrong. I think they should not have beat him. I don't think so. Now, I never was a cop, and so I don't know all of the tactics that they use, whether or not it's appropriate or not. But yeah, I don't think he should have been beat the way he was. The police officers, the 3 police officers that were charged, went to trial and were found not guilty. Then in 1992, as a result of that, there was mass rioting in Los Angeles. A lot of places in Los Angeles were burning down, looting, and everything else, just like today, with a whole ton of destruction. Reginald Denny, a white truck driver, was pulled out of his truck, beaten almost to an inch of his life, and people laughing and kicking and going, oh, yeah, it doesn't, 2 wrongs don't make a right. But that was back then. Rodney King himself had repeated offenses even after all of that. Even after all of that was done and said, had repeated cases of drunk driving, crashing into a brick wall with a car, drug addiction, alcoholism. He hit his wife with a car, intentionally knocking her to the ground, and had other traffic violations. His life was full of crime, and died in 2012. So every person is important, but at the same time, every person is responsible for the choices that they make. So if you want to be martyred for something that's worthy of being martyred for. And yet, you have the Jesse Jacksons, the Al Sharptons, the Black Lives Matter, the Antifa movements. You have all of these bottom feeders raising up other bottom feeders and creating more division and rage instead of actually trying to solve problems. It's a long history of this. 4 days after the George Floyd incident, there were riots in Oakland, California. 4 days later, a Homeland Security officer, a black police officer, David Patrick Underwood, was shot several times to death defending the courthouse. He's defending the courthouse. A black officer was shot. This happens quite a bit, folks. And where's the outrage for his death? It doesn't fit the narrative. It doesn't fit the Black Lives narrative. It doesn't fit their version of how to control people, of how to gin up hatred and everything else. Because a guy who was doing the right thing as a police officer was defending the courthouse. And they killed him. This happens. That's just the latest. There's tons of cases like this all over the place. Okay, now in Oakland, same city, Oakland Unified School District has their own police force. They're voting to disband that. They want to defund the police all across this country. This is the latest thing that's going on. They want to defund the police. They're trying to take school resource officers, which are police officers. It's the politically correct term for a police officer in the school. And in the city that I live in, the 2 cities the area I'm living in, they're voting to get rid of this stuff. And it's insanity. This isn't going to create safer schools. This is going to create safer communities. It's going to create even a bigger problem. And I'll talk more about defunding the police and the school system with the police and school shootings and stuff like that. I'm going to address that in a future video. But in Oakland, they're voting to get rid of that. And Oakland, California is one of the biggest cities in the United States for mass systemic crime. You want to talk about systemic racism? A systemic crime. And the people who have run that city for decades, often black political leaders and white political leaders, do not want to solve anything. They just want to keep that system going. It's insane. Atlanta shooting of recently Rayshard Brooks. Okay. And the rioting afterwards to burn down a Wendy's. So caught on a police officer's body cam that Rayshard Brooks is a guy who late at night was in a Wendy's parking lot, fell asleep. The employees called the police. Then they come. They ask the several times, sir, can you roll down your window? Can you open your door? He opens the door. They ask him, hey, what's really going on? They say, should you be driving? And the guy responds, Rayshard Brooks responds, no, I shouldn't be driving, and everything else. Have you had something to drink? He's like, oh, I can't really remember. And he's all like, well, we're going to need you to step out of your car. You're blocking the drive-through. You're impeding the business here of operating, even late at night. And so they said, look, we need to give you a breathalyzer. He submits to that. Breathalyzer comes to find out that he is. They determined right there on the scene that he had been drinking. So they say, okay, well, we're going to place you under arrest. And he resists arrest. So he resists arrest, and as the police officer grabs his taser, Rayshard Brooks grabs the taser away from him and begins to run away. Then, as they give chase, they turn around. Brooks turns around and points the taser at the police officer, and the police officer pulls out his pistol and shoots him. And so you're going to burn down a Wendy's. You're going to riot in Atlanta, not only over George Floyd and raise him up as a martyr, but you're going to do the same thing to Rayshard Brooks. So instead of actually looking at the cases individually and addressing them individually, you want to lump them all together and just burn the thing down. That's insane. And people need to speak up about it, because what's happening is this Black Lives Matter movement has become so strong now that you have city councils, you have mayors and governors and legislatures. They're afraid of these people. So you become afraid of the mob. You become afraid of these gangsters. This isn't about making, about saying Black lives really matter. Not if you're afraid to have law and order. This stuff is allowed to happen, and it shouldn't be allowed to happen. All lives do matter. So, Freddie Gray, selling Lucy cigarettes, which I thought was just ridiculous that it was a crime, a petty crime for that to even happen. And a police officer puts him in a chokehold to take him down to the ground. As a result, Eric Gardner dies. And look, I haven't been a police officer, but the way I understand it is that if you're going to administer a chokehold, it has to be done very specifically in a very controlled way. Otherwise, you can seriously hurt somebody, even kill somebody. So why that was allowed to happen, I don't know. Maybe it wasn't enough training. I don't even know why in that jurisdiction it's wrong to sell loose cigarettes. I don't know. It seems really weird. I'm not a smoker. I don't like people that smoke. I don't hang around that stuff at all. It's just, I just never liked that stuff. But it did seem absurd that they would escalate, that the cops seemed to escalate over something like that. But Eric Gardner himself also had a long criminal history. So the cops knew that this guy had been a problem for a long, long time and just constantly always in trouble with the law. Didn't deserve to be killed. Same thing with George Floyd. Did not deserve to be killed. Should have found a better way to place him under arrest and so forth. Freddie Gray, also a person with a very long criminal history, arrested for possession of knife he legally wasn't supposed to have or whatever. Died in a police van. Probably was not properly restrained. Had spinal cord injury. Went into a coma and died. Those police officers that were found not guilty or acquitted. The point where I bring those two guys up, and that is every individual, not just the police officers, but the criminals themselves need to be held accountable for the crimes, the choices that they make in life. All lives do matter. But at the same time, you have to take personal responsibility for the choices that you make in life and the choices that lead up to those horrific events. I'm not saying that a person who committed a crime, say 20 years ago, is the cause of that person's own death. But what I'm saying is that a series of events that the person chooses can ultimately lead up to that. Ahmaud Arbery was killed by two white men, also in Georgia, for perceived trespassing by two vigilante white dudes. That's horrific. And it needs to be properly investigated. I think it is. We'll see what this happens. The thing that I'm bringing this up for is that the media reported that it was a cop that killed him, and it wasn't. It was a former cop. Now, I don't know the status, whether he was retired, whether he was fired beforehand, or whether he quit. I don't know. But they're going to use the fact that he was a police officer at one point to really make this about racism. Instead of judging the case on its individual merits and looking at that and really getting to the bottom of that. But no, Ahmaud Arbery should not have been killed. It was vigilantism, and that's not right either. Al Sharpton and the crew, they just gin up, they keep saying there's systemic racism, and all that is just fueling rage. It's increasing rioting and looting and more crime. Tuesday, June 15th, in New York City, 31-year-old man Rashad Brimage attacked a 92-year-old woman. As he approached her, he comes up right as he's passing her. He just pushes her head, pushes her right over. She was in a walker. And she was scooting along the sidewalk with a walker. She falls over, hits her head on a fire hydrant. And she's not dead. She's in the hospital. But if she dies of her injuries, what about her life? What about her life? That's elderly abuse. That's blatant disregard for another person. That's blatant disregard for somebody who's 92 years old. And it doesn't matter if she was white. What if she was a black elderly woman? And he did that. What if it was a black Asian woman? You have thugs who are committing crimes, and somehow it's not a big deal. Well, it sure to hell is a big deal. All lives matter. All of them. This guy was arrested. This 31-year-old Rashad Brimage had been arrested 101 times. This is not a hero in the community. This is a reprobate. This is a person who's made a series of choices to be a thug, to have blatant disregard for other people. He doesn't have compassion. He doesn't have empathy. This isn't about race. It's about what's inside the person. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, he certainly was not a perfect man, but he set a good enough example that he the head of the civil rights movement in the 1950s, 1960s. He set a good enough example that through nonviolence could show all of us a better way. And if you listen to all the black people in front of the camera today, they don't communicate Martin Luther King Jr.'s sentiments, words, or deeds. It's like they've forgotten him or never even learned about him. It's horrific. It's as if they completely just forgot. This is a guy who, in 1962, Lincoln Memorial, in his speech that inspired so many people for change in a nonviolent way, says that he dreams of a day when his children will be judged on the content of their character and not the color of their skin. I have more to address about that later on in another video. Bobby Kennedy. Let me back up here. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed in 1968. The same night that he was killed, Bobby Kennedy was in Indianapolis giving a speech. And he addressed the people. A lot of people there were of lots of different races. Whites, blacks, Hispanics, etc. And he explained in that speech, in a relatively short speech, that as the rest of America rioted, looted, and burned, he called for peace. And that night, people did not riot, loot, or burn, or assault people. They cried. They called out to Jesus. They listened to Bobby Kennedy, who was running for president of the United States, a white guy, a Democrat, in 1968. See, that's a better way. Those days are long gone, apparently, because they forgot history. They didn't learn the lessons. They didn't take the good that was being shown back in the 60s, 1968, 1962, and so many other times. They didn't take the good and use that for today. The civil rights leaders have dropped the peace. They've dropped it today, and they've abandoned it for more bloodshed, hatred, and division, and to manipulate people to burn it all down. What we're seeing today in our cities is really evil personified. And isn't that what the devil is? Isn't that what the devil really is to steal, kill, and destroy? Steal, kill, and destroy. Isn't that what we're seeing? The division amongst all of us. The division and the fear. You're fearful of Black Lives Matter movement. Instead of it being an all lives matter movement, it's just one group pitted against the other. It's not right. We'll have more to say on the State of our Union topics in the next few days. This is tough stuff, folks. But we need not be afraid. Don't be afraid. Have a great day, folks. Love you. May God bless America. And all Black lives matter. All lives matter. All people matter. Take care.